What we're going to discuss today is the development of a self-assessment survey. We've talked about developing a survey, but we haven't really, drilled down into the specifics of, the fact that there will be two different surveys that you're going to want to look at. So the first one is the self-assessment, and I have an example here that I want to show you. This one is one that's is already constructed. You can use parts of this, or you can change this. What you want to do is make sure that if you use one that's already pre-constructed, obviously you're going to want to provide appropriate copyright information. You're also going to want to make sure that this really is the survey that best represents the information you want to be able to glean from your students. So the first 5 questions relate to the technology skills and access that your student has. Those 5, I think, are probably the 5 most important, because they let you know whether or not your student has access to the internet, that they have the ability to even know how to save documents to a desktop or a folder, have email, do you have to get one set up for them, those type of questions. The idea of saving a document to a desktop or creating a folder, those are pieces that are going to help your student to be much more successful in your course, because if they take more than one class, they're going to need to develop a very appropriate organized system of their courses. So walking them through a piece like that, if they don't have that, is going to be probably one of those tutorials that you'll want to develop. The second set of 5, I'm not so certain. Like I said, I don't mind taking risks when learning. You can change that up, because really what they're talking about there is more the self-directedness of their ability to work on their own. So I don't know that I like the title, I don't mind taking risks when learning. I would probably frame it in, I believe that I'm a self-directed learner, and then use some of these examples. But whatever you do, make it more in line with what you're looking at doing, because again, taking risks, it implies different things to different students. I don't want the students to think that, or I wouldn't, I'm not saying you should, I believe that I would not want my students to think that in an online course they are taking a risk. To some degree they are, but do we need to set them up for the fact that this is a risky endeavor? No. I am organized and self-disciplined learner, I think that's important for you to be able to address. Whether or not you employ all 5 of these questions in this exact statements, or you change them around, I would make sure you address, though, the idea of organization and self-disciplined learning, because that is a question that will let you know specifically how your students are going to do in this environment without a teacher looking over their shoulder. The next 5 deal with the ownership issue of learning. I think we need to know, are they willing to take ownership of their learning, or do they expect you to spoon feed every piece to them? Because if that's the case, this absolutely is not the environment for them. This is not going to be successful, because you cannot spoon feed students in an online environment. It just isn't going to work. You're going to get burned out. Your students are going to get frustrated, because you're going to at some point start to resent the fact that it becomes more of a what feels like a full-time babysitting job, as opposed to the idea of I'm teaching students about the content that they need to know. So getting that question answered is probably going to be the most eye-opening experience for you in this particular environment. And then the last set there is the set that deals with communication and study skills. I think those are things that you need to know too. Do I particularly like the way these are framed? Not really. I think there's better ways to frame those questions. So I think that you want to have those questions in your self-assessment survey, but I would definitely reframe several of those questions. After you complete, or they complete the survey, because this is in a yes or no format. And again, I've talked about the fact that in higher ed, I use a Likert-based. I would never use the Likert-based in a K-12 environment. The yes or no is much easier for students to deal with. So if they answered 23 to 25 items with a yes, you're pretty certain that they're going to be okay in this environment. If they're about 20 to 22, they're going to be okay, but you may have some issues that you're going to need to be kind of cognizant of as they go and navigate through your course. And you may have to, look at what it is. Is it a technological skill? Is it an organization skill? So maybe it's like it deals with an issue as simple as the ability to organize all of their files after they've downloaded them from your course, those type of things. If they have fewer than 20 that they scored a yes on, you really need to kind of counsel them through the possibility of another method of taking classes, because I'm not so certain that they would be successful. But then in saying that, you may not have a choice in the fact that they're going to be in your class. But I think it's important that at that point you talk to the parent and talk to the student and just let them know of the obstacles that are going to be challenging their student when they take this online course. So again, that's just an example. You can use any of those questions. Just make sure you use copyright information, but I definitely would suggest that there's many of these that you should retool to be more specific to your students. Okay, so the next piece we're looking at is the preparing to teach. If you had to look at a timeline for this developing of courses, your course and everything, we're in that point where we're going to start preparing to teach, and we're going to look at characteristics, and those relate specifically to characteristics of your students. You're absent of the face-to-face pieces that allow you to be able to talk, to see, to observe mannerisms that allow you to see what kind of student the student is and what the traits are. So you're going to have to be much more adept at reading some of those signs. So we'll get into more of that in our class on Thursday, but I wanted to at least let you know that's an area we're going to talk about. In addition to that self-assessment survey, you need to develop a technology survey, and that is going to speak to the specifics of their level of technology. You're going to be asking them to work 100% with a computer, and most students I think do okay with it, but there are going to be things that they may not know, and you may have students that have absolutely no technology background whatsoever. So you have to develop a survey that asks the right questions of the student, so that you know that if they've got a challenge, like for example, if they have a very limited internet connection, is that going to be too big of an obstacle for them to overcome? Or can just the strategic timing of when they access information and download pieces going to be the fix for them to be able to be successful in your course? So those pieces are going to be important, and we'll look at some technology surveys so that way you'll be able to have an idea of what might be appropriate for your students. And then the skill relates to their ability to be able to complete certain tasks, and it can be answered in somewhat of that self-assessment survey. So when you get those back, and that would be the first thing that you would get back, so you would at least know your learners, you can start identifying specific skills that you believe are things that you're going to have to account for in developing your content for your course. So that's kind of just a really brief overview. We're going to get into more depth about that, so don't worry that this is all you're going to get about that. We will be talking about it more. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 10 essential skill sets that are considered to be necessary for someone to teach, design in an online environment. The first one, of course, is the course planning and organization. And we've talked quite a bit about that in class. We've talked about the importance of that, because you do not have the ability to do the on-the-fly adjustments that you are able to do in a face-to-face class. You also do not have the ability to be able to, if you forgot to include something, like a document, you don't have the ability to add that into your course. The next set is the verbal and nonverbal presentation skills. What that speaks to is that if you are doing any sort of synchronous, class time where you required all the students to be there, how comfortable you are, in that environment, the cues that you give, because it's really, again, until you've done that, it's a little bit more, I think, unnerving, because you're not nearly as comfortable. Nobody's taping you. This is a piece where it's getting recorded. People see this. So the verbal and nonverbal skills that you use are important. So I always recommend just kind of practicing a couple of times, recording it, see what you don't like, see what you like. It really gives you an idea of what your students see. The collaborative teamwork, that is the ability to be able to know what groups you work together, that work well together, and then putting them in that types of groups. Because the last thing you want to do is put students together that absolutely cannot work together, or one person is more controlling than the other, and so what it does is create a hostile environment where people don't want to work, and they just go ahead and let other people do the job. So you want to make sure that you are able to facilitate the best type of collaborative teamwork as possible. Questioning strategies. Now, those are probably one of the more key things, because you need to be able to put in enough strategies that allow your students to understand, to be able to promote engagement, and to enhance the independence for all learners. What types of questioning strategies you use are really going to be things that you feel the most comfortable with. There are so many out there. It depends, again, on the environment. It depends on what it is you are asking your students to do. But it's the idea of what types of embedded thinking that you are trying to foster, and how you're going to get your students to that particular piece. So I would definitely think about how it is that you want to get them to use those higher order thinking skills, and how you're going to get them to the next level. So those questioning strategies are going to make a big difference in that. And then, of course, the subject matter expertise, well, that's you guys. I mean, that really is just you. But if you remember from when we first started talking about there was a time when, because online is still fairly new in K-12, not so much in higher ed, but there was a time when they were, allowing people to teach that just had a bachelor's degree, but not necessarily a license or expertise in that field. So we really want to match people up with the proper expertise in teaching in online, because if you don't have that expertise, you're not going to come across as an effective instructor, and your students are going to be the losers on that particular piece, because if you have somebody who doesn't know it, then those students come out of that grade level with not enough tools to be able to get them to the next level of their education. And then involving students and coordinating their activities at field sites. Becky, this is a question for you. So this is something you're going to be responsible to speak to in our class on Thursday. I know I had thought that I heard from one of the other students that taught at Insight that they said that they did have those type of activities, and I want to know if you are particularly involved in that, or if you know about it, and how that type of activity is facilitated and coordinated. And so Becky, if you could come prepared to speak about that, I would appreciate that. The other piece is the knowledge of the basic learning theory, and we've talked about the learning theories. We talked about it. One of the things at the very first class we had is about the basic learning theory. So what I'm going to ask all three of you to come in is to talk to me about your a learning theory, and we've talked about several. If you think back to the PowerPoints that we've had so far, we've talked about a few different learning theories. You can also research on your own, but come prepared to talk about a learning theory, not just the basic learning theory, but a learning theory. Knowledge of the distance learning field, that's another area we talk about quite a bit, because as anything, it's ever changing. You don't do the same type of delivery that they did 100 years ago. If you go back to one of the very first PowerPoints that I showed you, we talked about the timeline for distance learning and how when it began. So that's another thing that you guys need to look up, and I need you to be able to tell me um, when did we first see the emergence of distance education, and so be able to answer that. Design of study guides. Now that also it means that you are able to design tutorials. That is exactly what that is. They call them study guides. I call them tutorials. Uh, but those tutorials are going to be instrumental in the success of your students, because without those tutorials, they are not able to complete the task at hand, because they don't have you right there in the classroom talking to them, walking them through the pieces. So you need to embed every little piece, that's what I call the pre-anticipatory tools. You need to have those built in. Remember our task analysis from last week, and remember you guys are bringing a task analysis for this week, but I had you guys pick a piece of paper and you did the task analysis for that. Almost, I think both Rachel and Becky, you both left off the piece that about unscrewing the cap, whether it was the toothpaste or the jar. You both forgot that. But that's an intuitive piece we think that people should know, but you can't assume they know anything. So the study guides or tutorials are key in your students having the ability to be able to facilitate, every step without you being there. So you're giving them those tools, and you just have to make sure you've given them every tool they need. It's kind of like imagining that, somebody said, go bake a cake, and they said they were providing you with all of the necessary ingredients, all of the equipment to do that, but they leave off one essential piece, like, the ability to have a mixing bowl. How critical is that going to be if you have nothing to put all of your ingredients in? That's the things you have to think about. So remember your experience from our task analysis, and that'll help you to develop your tutorials with all of those intricacies that are necessary. And then graphic design and visual thinking. The graphic design part is really how easily your course is going to be navigatable. Is it too cumbersome? Did you have like 4 folders, one embedded inside the other one for them to be able to finally get to the actual folder they're supposed to have? Or did you add more sub tabs below a main tab, and so it wasn't as intuitive? The graphic design piece makes it visually appealing, number one. Two, makes it easy to navigate so that your students don't give up because they keep on thinking that there must be a mistake. And three, it follows usability, good usability design. So it's based off of the principles of Web Usability 101, and it applies very dramatically to the idea of designing an online course. And then the visual thinking is the piece that allows students to have the visuals of whatever it is. So if you're asking them to design a web quest, for example, I would provide a visual that showed them what that outcome looked like. I wouldn't give them all of the pieces so that all they had to do was mirror it. I would just show them what a finished product looked like. So in the case of a web quest, since I use them in a variety of different ways, I might just show them one where I was facilitating a large audience in questions, which would totally be different from what I would be expecting my students to construct, because theirs would be an actual task that they were having students do, and they had to follow all the components. But I used it, and it gave them an example of what the pages, how many pages they had to have, what would be visually appealing, text size, and color, font selection, those type of things. So the design and visual piece are extremely important. And the next piece we're going to look at is interaction. I talked about interaction quite a bit, that idea of student to student, student to teacher. This site is called the Illinois Online Network. Now, what this does is that it has several different activities, and this is their online teaching activity index. What your task, another task for you to do for Thursday, is to review one out of all of these different pre-made activities and come to class with one of those that you believe that you could use in your particular course module. Now, keep in mind that I'm not saying that you have to use the exact piece that they have, but I want you to be able to say, oh, I went to the literature review and I'm going to use that, for my students to be able to mirror, the constructing of their literature review. And so then you would go through these different pieces. What you want to be able to let your students, let me know and let the class know, is that you went to one of these and this is how you would utilize it. There is a piece here that says activity template. This is a template that you can use to construct yours for your actual course. So this isn't the one I want you to use for tomorrow night or for Thursday night, but I want you to bring. I want you to just tell me one of these different activities that you looked at and thought it might work in your class. But from there, I do want you to be using this activity template for future activities that you're going to embed in your course. Okay? So just to go over it again, you're going to find one of the very many of these that are on here. So any of these, you're going to have reviewed it and then be able to tell me and the rest of the class how you might use some activity like this in your course. And then for future use, you'll use this particular template to be able to design future examples. Okay? Okay, you've worked on your syllabus. Most of you, I had one person that sent me something that wanted me to look at it, and I did. There are things about the syllabus we've talked about that I think are really important in an online environment. One being the fact that the syllabus, for me in my my graduate and undergraduate classes, is that it is paramount for me to understand what my students know. So if they read it, then I know that they read it because they sent me the email, that they told me that they read it, that they were able to at least understand the expectations, and that went into the amount of time that was involved in the course, because my syllabus talks about time on task. It talks about the number of hours that are going to be involved in the course, and it also talks about what are the prerequisites, what the standards are, and the objectives. I also have specific amounts of information regarding what my expectation is from them as a learner, from me as the instructor, and for the amount of information that they must provide when they're responding on the discussion thread or blog or wiki. So I go into a little bit more depth and detail than I asked you guys to do for yours. However, that doesn't mean that when you get yours back from me with my feedback, that I won't suggest some additional information. Not that that will come in the form of a deduction, but it will be a suggestion that you might want to include. So remember that piece is critical, because that is the only way that you're going to be able to establish that your students absolutely read it, they understood it, and that it provides them with ownership. So you can do one of two things. You can have them email like I do, or you can have them sign something, but either way you need to keep those in a file, and I do. And I many times come back to them when students tell me that they didn't understand or they didn't know, and 9 times out of 10 it was in the syllabus, and they sent me that email saying they had read it, they understood it, had no questions, and then would comply with the terms of the contract. So it sounds like a legal and binding document. It's not that, but it's as close to that as we can get, because as teachers in an online course, we don't have as many avenues to hold students accountable since we don't really see them. So we've got to, employ whatever we can to make sure that they have those pieces embedded. So we'll be getting into the syllabus. I'll look over yours and grade it, and then when you get it back, if you have any questions, you can let me know. Okay, so in class on Thursday, we're going to be talking more about the learner characteristics, and we touched on that briefly in the preparing to teach phase, and we'll go into more depth on that Thursday night. It's important you understand the learner characteristics because, again, you're not going to know your students nearly as well as you do in a face-to-face class. So what you have to rely on are the tools that you are given by knowing these characteristics in a much more in-depth, viewpoint. And so we need to look at those and see how you're going to strategize those characteristics and then apply them to the students that you have in class. So don't forget that you have the embedded assignments within this lecture, and bring your article. We'll go ahead and discuss those with the questions. We'll also then go into your task analysis that you're supposed to do, and we'll go into our learner characteristics. So I hope you guys had a good couple of weeks off, and I look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday.